Okay, let's give this a try and look at Isaiah 52 and 53 with a bunch of background noise. Hopefully you can hear me. We're starting in Isaiah 52, verse 13. This was penned by probably the disciples of the prophet Isaiah, sometime hundreds of years before Jesus. And there's debate about when, but actually it doesn't really affect our interpretation of this particular passage. Sometimes a passage written in the prophets is called an oracle, and you see how this one holds together, even though it goes over a chapter division. It holds together on this concept of this person called the servant of the Lord. As you read this, you'll see some interesting identification between the prophet and the people of God and God himself. So as reading it, maybe the prophet is speaking for God, and then the prophet is speaking for his people. Like, what about us? Or the prophet may be speaking to God. And then at some points, it's almost as if the prophet is speaking as God is speaking directly. The other way to look at this is as if God is speaking the whole time, and so God himself is speaking for the people and to the people. And God is radically identifying with his people and with his prophet, speaking to and through the prophet. Either way, there's this an identification between message and messenger, between God and his chosen prophet. I think if you're looking at the NIV, there's just really good stanza breaks. This whole thing is in poetic form. That's important to pay attention to. As we go through that, I think we go through stanza by stanza, and you can also then, you want to really pay attention to what the poetic images are trying to say. And try to interpret those images and not rush through those images. What do they imply? What do they mean? Excuse me, I'm going to cough here. So throughout this year, we're going to see the work of God's servant, or the work of God through and in the servant, or even the work of God with the servant. And of course, there's some really amazing identification going on here. So let's just run through it real quick. Stanza 1, see, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told they will see, what they have not heard they will understand. Some important things here is just this idea of being highly exalted. What does that mean? And that's really an enthronement image, someone being lifted up to a throne of authority or lordship. And we also see here kings will shut their mouths. What does that image imply? And I'll let you guys kind of work on that yourself, and I'm going to tell you what it means. But what is it like? The king has to shut his mouth. What does that mean? It's a pretty powerful image. And then what does it mean that they see what they were not told, and they hear what they did not understand? And you get this sense of an unfolding of a secret, or knowledge that was previously unknown to the nations is now being made known to them. Something that maybe only God's people, the Jews, knew is now being revealed to more people. It's also interesting here that this servant is a human, but a disfigured and broken human. The next stanza, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. It's interesting here, you have a metonymy here. Who has the arm of the Lord been revealed? The arm of the Lord here is a stand-in for the servant. So the arm of the Lord indicates the Lord's strength. And so the servant, although he is, like grown on dry ground, and he has no majesty, and he's kind of ugly, and he's full of suffering, this is the Lord's strength. Very powerful imagery. Stanza 3. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray, each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Some important questions here. What did this servant accomplish, and how? And you can, there's just a list. So pay attention to what is happening there. And at the end it says we all like sheep have gone astray. What does that image mean? What does it mean that we're like sheep? And what does it mean to go astray? And how does that tie together with what this servant accomplished, and maybe why it needed to be accomplished in the first place? Next stanza, he was, again, the servant. He was oppressed and afflicted, the servant who is the arm of the Lord. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off in the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the dead and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. How did the servant suffer? What does that tell us about the servant as he suffered? What did he do, and what does that tell us about him? What does it mean that he was cut off in the land of the living? Secret, he died. To be cut off in the land of the living means you're now in the land of the dead. And then the end here, just something you might not immediately grasp, something not necessarily obvious, that he was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. Why is that problematic? And of course, the Savior that the Jewish people were looking for would be someone who would rescue them from those who had power. Those who had power, especially in the prophetic voice, if you read the rest of Isaiah, those who are in power and are rich are constantly being called into account, constantly being promised judgment by God. But yet his servant, who is supposed to rescue and vindicate the poor and the oppressed, in his death is somehow assigned a grave with the wicked. Of course, many Christians see this as Jesus' death and his burial in Joseph of Arimathea's grave, who was a wealthy person. Not necessarily a wicked person, but a wealthy person. And so how did this man of the poor end up buried with the rich? Especially because he didn't act like the rich. He was not violent nor deceitful. Final one. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many. See, now it's God talking. And he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. It says here at the beginning, it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. Well, why? What does that imply? What's it telling us? And of course, the second line says, the Lord made him an offering for sin. So that's the Lord's intention. And now, though, as we continue, he will see his offspring, the servant will, and prolong his days, and he will see the light of life and be satisfied. So you have a powerful image of someone who's been resurrected, someone who had suffered at the very bottom, even using the imagery of being cut off in the land of the living in the previous stanza, and now this person sees the light of life and has children. You can't do that when you're dead. So there's something really powerful going on here. And it continues in verse 12. You see this imagery of victory. So again, what did the servant accomplish is an important thing to pay attention to. And this, dividing the portion with among the great, the spoils with the strong. It's this imagery of after a victory in battle, those who won the battle will divide the spoils. And so through suffering, through even death, and being crushed at the will of the Lord, this servant becomes the victor. So hopefully those are some useful insights as you prepare to lead your group through studying this passage. And please let me know if this was helpful at all or just distracting. Love you guys.